Our Facebook status as a company with auto tracking is it's complicated.
Yes.
So it's a feature that can work really good, and it's a feature that can not really do what you wanted it to do.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to In the Trenches. Today, we're going to be talking everything PTZ. And yes, we will be defining what that acronym stands for. So along with me today is our awesome panel of experts. Of course, we have our support team manager, Michael Bell.
Hey, guys.
We also have our product expert, James Campbell, here with us.
Hello.
Awesome. And last but certainly not least, we've got Matthew Netherland, our CEO.
Hi, everybody.
Awesome. And he plays dual roles here. He's also the CEO, but he is our resident business owner expert. So that's why we've got some good input from him on that side of the house. So I think we should start off by, tackling the elephant in the room here. What does PTZ even stand for?
I guess I'll take that. PTZ stands for pan, tilt, and zoom. So they refer to a type of camera that can be moved around and controlled. So, every PTZs come in different forms. You see some that are more bell-shaped and kind of hang down. There are some that are kind of in dome form as well. So a bunch of different kind of shapes and sizes, but the primary thing is that you can control them remotely using, your smartphone, your local interface on the recorder, your apps, your web interface, and you can move them around up, down. So panning, tilting, and zooming.
Awesome. And do all cameras have this capability, or is this capability of only certain specific cameras?
Only specific cameras. So the other cameras that are not considered PTZs in our instance could be considered fixed lens, to where you can't do anything with it. But we do have a few that do have a zoom function. So a zoom and a focus, you can't move them left, right, up, and down, but they can zoom in on a particular area for that type.
Gotcha. But the cameras that can pan, tilt, and zoom, that's a specific category.
Correct.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Awesome.
It's a good question, because we have had customers purchase our fixed dome cameras, and they think, hey, where's the PTZ controls? It says I can't control it. What's going on?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
They don't realize that is actually a manual thing. So it's, as you're shopping out there for security cameras, it is important to know that, PTZs are specific. Don't assume just because it's a dome camera that it can be controlled. Most cameras out there are not PTZs. It's a very small percentage of the market, actually.
And on our website, it does list PTZ as a particular section. So everything under that section, you are going to be able to move around and control.
Oh, great. Good. And I think, James, you had spoke to it earlier, but with PTZs, you can control them locally, right? Like at the recording device itself. And do you do that via a mouse or a joystick? Like, how do you actually interact with the PTZ?
Yeah, so you just basically control there. You bring up the PTZ control option, and then you'll have like a virtual joystick. And whatever direction you click in, the camera goes in. And so that same virtual kind of controller shows up on your local interface with the mouse, your smartphone with your finger, you move it in the same direction. And then of course on the web interface and view station, it's kind of similar as well. You get the same little joystick that pops up to control it.
Awesome. So there's a couple different ways you can control it, and it sounds like you certainly can remotely, which is awesome. What are some reasons why you would even want a PTZ?
So there's a bunch of different reasons depending on which model you have. So you can have PTZs that are not designed to be long range, for example, and you're really just being able to move back and forth. And then you have models that have an extreme amount of zoom. A PTZ is generally going to be your most long range camera for the long range PTZs. And obviously, when you're talking about something that's very far away, it can be important to be able to move it left and right. So something like a varifocal camera, which also allows you to zoom in, that's great for like a use case like a gate. The gate is not going to move, you know where it's going to be. A PTZ might be really good for an open field, for example. You don't really know where they're going to come through, and you do need to zoom in on them.
Gotcha. So covering sweeping areas, larger areas, it seems.
Specifically for the longer range ones. The shorter range ones have some different use cases.
Yeah, so PTZs come in different forms and sizes. You've got ones that can see a person mile away and more. And you've got ones that are sort of for short distances. So PTZs to me act as like an auxiliary to your main system. They're good at gathering details, especially from a distance. So, anybody from a very high security area where you have potentially somebody manually controlling that PTZ at all times or during business hours and looking around, to commercial systems where things are being a little bit more automated by presets, patrols, and stuff that we'll talk about, I'm sure, later on in this video. Of course, the big downside to a PTZ that everyone should consider is a PTZ can only see what it sees at the time. You can't go back on your playback and then zoom out if you've zoomed in a mile away and you're looking at something a mile away. So that's the one consideration. A PTZ is only as good as what it's looking at the time. So
and the same thing for left and right. If you point it to the left, it's obviously not seeing what's at the right of your screen.
Right. So I think it's important to notate there that this is an auxiliary type camera, right? A PTZ is not going to replace what a fixed lens camera would give you in terms of a constant view, right? So that's cool.
Yeah, I would always say that PTZ is a good thing to add to a system. It's not replacing an entire system.
Right, because it's common people ask, oh, what's the field of view of a PTZ then? If I can turn it all the way around, can I cover all that coverage? And like James said, it's what you're looking at is what's important. So that's awesome. James, you mentioned some words in there about like patrols and presets and things of that nature. So I'm guessing by the sounds of it, these cameras have some special capabilities.
Yeah, they do. So PTZs are more than just cameras that you can control and yourself. There's also tools to aid in the operation and control of the PTZ. So the first one we can talk about is presets. Anybody want to take the preset thing, or I'll be happy to take it.
Do you mind if I sort of frame a little bit of a larger? I would say that, like, in general, these help automate the usability of the devices. So if you're using, let's say, the joystick and you wanted to go back and forth between two different areas very quickly, that can actually take a little bit of time. If you want to have precise movements, you have all these sort of functions, presets, patrols, patterns, auto tracking, and auto guard are all these functions that help automate the usage of this device.
Yeah, and they come with no presets already set up. So that is something that the user will need to set up because every camera is going to look at something different. Every camera is in a different position. So the user will then, after they get their camera mounted, they'll go through and they'll set up what presets that they're looking to get. It's very easy to set it up. It's a one button save. You can rename it at that same time, and it's easy to recall.
So to even back out a little bit, a preset is essentially a save position within the PTZ. So like Michael is saying, you move that camera to a spot. Let's just say you have the front entrance, and you zoom in on it, you get the view you want to, and you hit save, and you can name it. You can put front entrance, and then you can go over to your shipping dock and zoom in, move it, save it exactly where you want, and then save that as your shipping dock location, for example. And so you can think of these, preset for, if you're not quite gathering what that is, almost like a bookmark location. It knows where to go when you click that, and you can call those at any time.
Gotcha. So we've got all these presets, all these bookmarked locations where the camera looks. From there, Matt mentioned a bunch of other features that are available with the cameras. Is there one that makes sense to talk about next?
Yeah, the preset patrol is really great. That one, you can take a group of your presets that you've already set up and have your camera automatically patrol through those presets throughout the day.
So presets would be something that allow the operator to become more efficient in how they're using it. A preset patrol starts to automate that, so you don't necessarily have to use the operator.
Gotcha. And it just rolls through the preset that you choose it to go through?
So when you're setting up a patrol, what you're setting is what preset it starts out with, what preset it goes to next. And in the settings in between that are two things. You've got speed, which tells you how quick it goes from preset 1 to preset 2. So you know, the slower it is, the more it's going to go slowly pan across there, which could be useful if you're trying to kind of gauge what's going on in your facility. Or you can have it go very fast and it might go boom, boom across. There's also the time that you stay at that individual location. Now there's a minimum one on each PTZ that's in the specs that you guys can see, but you know, you can set it to where one stays at 30 seconds, the next one stays 2 minutes if you want to. That way, you know, you can prioritize how long you want to be at a certain spot. So, and you know, you can have, I think, what is it, like 16 presets on each patrol or something like that, maybe. So you can have quite a bit of individual stops on each one. So you can have small stops in between if you wanted to, or you know, you can mess around with the timing and everything like that. There's tons of customization with this to fit your kind of unique need.
I mean, at its like most basic setup, you could set a preset to be able to say, look to the left, pan over slowly, look over to the right, get over there, rest for you know, a few seconds, pan back over, and just kind of do this repeatedly. It can get a lot more complex than that, but at the most basic level, it just, you got a start point, an end point, and additional points you want to set up, and then how quickly you want to move back and forth between them.
Gotcha. Makes sense. So starting to talk about some of the automation features that PTZs afford you, which is nice because you know, if I'm an owner and I don't have somebody on staff watching the camera system all the time, I feel like these features would be nice.
And just a quick thing about patrols too. I mean, these can be, you can turn them on manually if you want to. So you just hit the play button on them and they'll play that one. You can set it to where if nothing's going on with the PTZ at the time, you can set them on an auto guard, which I'm sure we're going to talk about here in just a second. Or once the PTZ is not moving, it can automatically go into a patrol.
So let's actually talk about auto guard since you already mentioned it. I think that's a perfect segue.
Yeah, so auto guard, what it is imagine you're controlling the PTZ, you're looking at something and you go, oh, hey, what's going on with my shipping dock? And your normal location looking at the exit or the entrance of your facility, right? And you go and you look at the shipping dock and then somebody asks you a question and you get distracted and you forget what you're doing with the PTZ and it's stuck on the shipping dock for the rest of the day. And you miss something going on at the entrance. So this is designed specifically to, after the PTZ is no longer being manually operated or under a patrol, that it can go back to a certain preset. It can do any kind of function, basically. It's basically a timeout, if that makes sense for people. But it can do like, go back to an individual preset. So it's looking at the same location every time. It can jump into a patrol. So you have a lot of options for that. But yeah, most people will go back to a preset location. So really cool function, really, really useful.
Very useful. And that also happens whenever you move the camera manually. You don't necessarily have to use you know, go to a preset. If somebody just comes up to the camera and they just move it to look at a particular thing that maybe not be a preset, it'll then go back to its home position.
Awesome. Now, a random question that I just thought of that came up while you all were explaining that. Does everybody have the ability to adjust or interact with the PTZ on the system?
Yeah, that depends on what the admin has allowed for each user. So, you know, there are multiple different permissions that are available for pretty much every camera on an NVR. And, you know, something like PTZ control can be granted or revoked. So it just depends on, you know, what the admin for that particular user sets up.
So in other words, the admin could say, this particular user over here can't see this camera at all. Certainly not even control it. They can't even see it. The next user could say you can see it, but you can't control it. And then, you know, you could have a sort of more advanced user that can see and control that camera.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, you know, especially when you start getting into larger systems, you can bump into each other. You know, like let's say Michael, James, and I are all logged in viewing a system. It's kind of pandemonium if we're all trying to move the PTZ at the same time. Sure. So you can control like who has access to be able to move the camera if you want to.
Which I could see being extremely beneficial in certain circumstances. That's awesome. Another feature that you guys mentioned earlier was something about auto tracking.
Yeah, so auto tracking is a capability on all of our PTZs right now, except the mini PTZ. And so there's basically, we have a really good article on auto tracking because, and we kind of bluntly say it here in this article, that auto tracking is one of those features that have probably the lowest satisfaction rate. And the reason why is kind of two things. Number one, expectations just generally sort of have to be realigned with kind of what's possible with the technology. And number two, a lot of the older PTZs out there, and still a lot of them on the market actually, only auto track based on the motion detection. Motion detection is simply pixel based, so it doesn't know the difference between a person, a car, or a branch that's floating in the wind. So it would go and track the branch, and it would be stuck in that branch for literally hours on end because it's like, hey, motion, let me go check it out. And of course, it's missing the cars coming in and everything else that it needs to, that you think it's going to do. So, yeah, I mean, definitely take a look at that article if you're interested in auto tracking. It goes into it in a lot of detail, but you know, if you do have a camera that's set up with the person in vehicle detection with some of the VCA options like intrusion detection or line crossing, it definitely works a lot better than it has in the past. So you set up, for example, a line crossing in the middle of the in your entryway of your location. It can track when a vehicle itself kind of goes past it, and then it can track the vehicle as it's going through your parking lot. And that's kind of the idea behind it.
There's still some problems with that. You know, if you have multiple people on campus at the same time, it may be following a person that doesn't matter to you, that's not a threat, and ignoring someone who is. So it's not always a perfect solution. You know, our Facebook status as a company with auto tracking is it's complicated. You know, so it's a feature that can work really good, and it's a feature that can not really do what you wanted it to do, and it's really hard to you know, create a situation where, especially in a busy environment, they might have, you know, a dozen people on campus at the same time. Which one should it track? It doesn't have that sort of queuing system in the way that a human operator would have. A remote location, you know, let's say you're an oil and gas rig and nobody should be here, it can work really well.
I think with auto tracking, the important thing to consider with it is it's never supposed to be a single camera, it does everything kind of job. And that's where a lot of the expectations are. They go, oh, auto tracking, this is going to be having like a person in this, and it's going to control it, and it's going to know exactly what I want it to see. And like,
Now I don't need to buy a security guard. I get to not pay that person. Yeah, that's not.
Or I don't need 5 other cameras to cover my parking lot because I have one camera with auto tracking function. That's just not the case. Your auto tracking, I always explain this to customers, is it should be considered a great tool to get details. It's very rarely, even when it tracks the right thing, and you know, maybe it tracks a guy coming in that's going to break a window or something like that in that scenario, and it tracks his car perfectly, but then it's looking at his car, nobody's coming out of the car for a couple of seconds, and it goes, okay, I'm done tracking it, let me go away.
I'm going back to the home position.
It misses, it's not gonna, it doesn't know a human being is in that car. It doesn't know to wait for somebody to come out of it, you know, so it doesn't have the logic that a human operator is going to have. It's never, you know, it may not ever get to that level, honestly, but you know, what it can do is that it may see that car very well enough to potentially get details on the car, potentially even see the person inside the car. And then you need to have a cameras that are covering your general area, so that even if that camera doesn't quite get a good image, it's far away from when he's breaking this window, but it's still getting the incident. So you have 2 pieces of evidence. You have the close-up camera, when even if it's not there for the entire time, you maybe get a face detail, maybe a plate if it's set up correctly. And then you have the further away camera that's getting the full incident. So it's a detail gatherer is the best. You know, if you have that expectation, you're going to be a lot happier with it. And if you have the expectation that's going to be a 1 camera silver bullet solution, you're going to be a lot more upset with it. So that's kind of where I
would also put the caveat that it's somewhat industry or location based. So again, I'll go back to, you know, remote operator oil, rig in the middle of nowhere, probably a good application. A mall parking lot is probably going to be really, really difficult to get the results that you want because there's so many people coming in and out, so many vehicles moving. Which one should it track? Even for gathering details in that sort of environment, you're probably a lot better off having a significantly increased number of regular cameras, because there's just so much activity that if you're focusing on this activity and zooming in it, you're probably missing that activity.
Mhm. And that kind of goes back to what James said earlier, that PTZs are good at looking at what they're looking at, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, I got brought onto a project a couple weeks ago to try and help troubleshoot a location that was experiencing a lot of vehicle vandalism. So people were coming into this location, and this location had 5 different entrances that were really, really far apart. And that sort of thing is really difficult to have sort of one PTZ solve it. That you had 5 different locations that someone could drive in, and let alone the fact that it wasn't even fenced. So that's just your vehicles would come in from these roads. You also had the ability that people could walk in from anywhere. That sort of solution, you need a lot of PTZs to be able to have that function. And some people come with this expectation that a single PTZ will be able to move all around and see everything. That's actually a lot harder when you think about it in the real world. If I might have 2 people at the same time from very different locations.
Does auto tracking interrupt patrols?
Good, very good question. And the answer is no. So once the PTZ is actually in a patrol and it's moving, it's not going to be able to then initiate auto tracking because the camera itself is moving, right? So it doesn't necessarily know what motion is anymore. It doesn't know if that car is moving, even if it has the advanced features. It doesn't know if that tree is moving that it really wants to see. So it's got once the patrol is activated, you can't like have auto tracking enabled, and then once it's at a preset, go ahead and auto track somebody else. A lot of people do want to do something like that, but unfortunately that's not currently how any PTZ works that I'm aware of.
I mean, if you think about it, from a perspective of if the camera itself is moving, you end up getting really bad analytic data on if is the object moving, because it appears to be moving the entire time. So what it does inside the UI in general is when you're moving the camera, it's not recording it as like a motion event. It's not perceiving the motion. It's like turning that off completely because it sees motion everywhere.
I think that brings up an even better option for a lot of people than auto tracking, which is, we don't really have a cool word for it, unfortunately, but it's basically the ability to set a fixed lens camera and set that on a VCA and trigger the PTZ to go to that location based on it. Does Michael, you want to jump into that?
It's my favorite thing about a PTZ.
Sounds pretty cool.
Sorry. So okay. Just thank you guys for talking so much about the auto tracking. Support really appreciates that because we do get a lot of calls expecting something more than what it's actually capable of doing. So thank you for that. But the fixed lens camera trigger, that one is our bread and butter. So my favorite thing is setting an intrusion area or a cross line detection for a particular fixed lens camera that is always looking at a particular view and setting up a line and saying, if something crosses this line, I want my PTZ to focus in on that line. And that is my favorite thing. It's so nice.
So let me unpack real quick why that's so great. So let's say you've got the home position for your PTZ looking over here, and it's not looking over there. So it's not recording that. So you have any sort of auto tracking enabled, it's not seeing the person that's over here. And if you've got another fixed lens camera that's able to look at that location, it doesn't matter where your PTZ, you're not relying on the PTZ is moving based upon what another camera sees. And this is so much more reliable and more effective than something like auto tracking, where you're limited to what is the camera viewing now. But the problem is, what if the person is behind the camera? What if the person is to the left of the camera and the camera's looking to the right? And so these fixed lens triggers are definitely the way that we recommend setting all of this up.
So to even give like a real world example where you've used this, like we go back and we mentioned that PTZs are only seeing what they're seeing. You can't go back and on playback. So, we have a front entrance, pretty narrow front entrance. And, in this case, the PTZ was looking towards the right. And we had a camera that's looking at the front entrance with a line crossing set up. Once that vehicle crosses that line, the PTZ knows, we set up a preset on that PTZ. The PTZ knows once that line's crossed, they go to that preset, and it's able to zoom in and get a better look at the vehicle coming out or going in. So it definitely, it's an easy thing to set up, but it's definitely something that you want to require. You definitely want to consider planning on that. Like, how many times is somebody going to go over there? If you're controlling that, make sure that you're not going to have the PTZ pinballing all around it at all times too. So you don't want to put it on necessarily on every camera, but you want to make sure it's strategically placed and planned out.
Do these triggers from fixed lens cameras, do they interrupt or disrupt patrol?
I think they will.
I believe so, yes. And then the home position would take over at that, or I'm sorry, the auto guard would take over at that point after so long of it just sitting there. Then the auto guard would start that patrol that's
Patrol
already
again.
set up.
Gotcha.
The presets are the triggers from the other cameras are a higher priority to the camera than whatever you're saying for auto guard.
All right, some housekeeping items. Got some questions here. Motors in these things, right? There's got to be motors that spin these cameras back and forth and make these maneuvers. What about the lifespan of these cameras? Are they shorter or longer than normal cameras?
I can tell you that our warranty is the same on them as a fixed lens camera. Now, as far as like longevity of a motor, of course, anything with moving parts is probably going to have, at some point they're going to potentially fail. Now, we don't have a higher failure rate on our PTZs or anything like that. We still offer the 5-year warranty option on the PTZs if you're interested too. That would still cover that motor. But there's things with the motors are built to last. They're built to be there and make sure that they're lasting for years and years. They're not something that's going to die in a year and you have to replace it, especially on ours. On lower end PTZs, that definitely happens. You've got very cheap motors in there, and
those are pretty easy to identify. If the PTZ is made out of plastic, that motor is going to die, because that means that the motor is usually made out of plastic. The other thing that I would mention as a big caveat here is that if you install a PTZ the way that it's meant to be installed, so it comes off the wall usually and then it hangs down. If you put that upside down, it's going to be well outside of warranty. It's not going to work right. It's not designed to do that. So same thing, you install it, sort of, not like this, but like that. That's going to burn the motor out. It's not designed to operate that way.
Yeah.
So,
one thing I'll also add on to that, some of our smaller PTZs don't have as powerful of motors as the larger PTZs. And those kind of protect themselves. Like we were talking about the preset patrols on those limit you to 2 minutes before the camera is going to be able to move again. So if it moves to one position, it's going to be there for 2 minutes before it moves to another position, because they know that motor is not as powerful as the larger cameras. And they do that for the longevity.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And actually, on the topic of motors, not all PTZs move as fast as, they're not all equal when it comes to motors movement speed too, which is a very important thing. So our smaller PTZ, the Lookout Mini, that's a pretty slow PTZ because it's covering a kind of a smaller area. So, when it's panning left and right, the maximum speed's fairly low. Whereas like on I think our fastest PTZ is actually the Lookout 2.0 V2. It's in the specs. You see how many degrees it can move a second. But that one can move very quickly left and right because it's more considered with somebody potentially operating it. The presets need to be very fast. So that's another thing to look out for when you are shopping for a PTZ, is don't assume that every PTZ is going to move as quickly or as even as much. Like our Lookout Mini actually only goes 345 degrees. So once it gets to the way back over here, it actually has to do like that and go it can't do 360. So every motor is not the same. I mentioned those dome PTZs that are out there too. Those are generally very slow. They don't have the space to put a higher end motor, faster motor in there. So, again, just don't assume that every PTZ moves the same. Look at those specs or get demos if you see video demos and everything like that.
You said something that was important that I won't cover. I'll come back to it. But another housekeeping question real quick. How does weather affect these things?
So any PTZs are gonna have different weather tolerances and everything like that. Our highest end PTZs are all IP66 or IP67 weatherproof, which means they can basically handle any weather outside. Their temperature ranges, of course, matter with PTZs as well. The highest end ones can go to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. But then we have other PTZs like the Lookout Mini that have a temperature range that's more for not quite as high as the higher end ones. And then we even have PTZs that are indoor only, like the Garrison. So, and that's going to be true again if you're shopping outside of SCW's ecosystem. There are going to be other PTZs that are not weatherproof that are only can be operated in above freezing temperatures and everything like that. So that's another important consideration and a really good question, because that's why some of the more expensive PTZs are more expensive.
Right. And final pin here on some of the housekeeping items, and we've been mentioning it a lot here, but I don't think we covered it in depth. We've mentioned the words like mini in some of our larger PTZs. What are the size of these things? Are these like normal size cameras or?
Not so much.
Gotcha. Okay, so
They
it's
go
something to
from
consider.
about this to this.
Yeah. So on the biggest end of the spectrum, like the Beacon, it's almost as big as like the size of your body minus your limbs. Like it's a giant camera, really big camera, but it's seeing 2 miles away. It needs to be able to have the ability to create that focal length between the image sensor and the lens, and so it needs to be bigger so that it could, so that it could zoom out to that degree. On the flip side, you've got more reasonably sized, like the mini models, like this. So they're not mammoth.
Yeah,
But
the mini is 10.6 inches in height.
Yeah,
Okay,
we have a good picture here to show you kind of the difference between
Thanks, James.
the bigger PTZs and the smaller PTZs. And then our newest PTZ, which is the Garrison 5.0, is an indoor only mini PTZ. And that's the smallest that we have. It's, basically like this big. And so it's meant to hang off a ceiling and, is our smaller of the group.
Okay, I was just teasing you. I have one more question for you in regards to housekeeping stuff. Okay, and then we'll be done. I promise.
this place is getting real clean in here. Real
yeah,
clean.
yeah. I am curious about now, the talk of motors and, extreme varifocal lens style image sensors and such. Do these cameras power directly from the recording device like a normal camera would? Or is that something that we should consider?
That's a very good question. So luckily, the Lookout Mini will. It is still power hungry though, so we might need to take into account what your NVR is able to output as far as power per port.
Gotcha.
And then also what other cameras are connected to that. So we can definitely do that calculation. That's not a problem. I don't have all the numbers in front of me, but as far as the full size and larger PTZs, those do come with an additional power source called a PoE injector that you need to put in line from your NVR to the camera. And you normally is usually 3 or 6 feet away from the NVR side, and then it can run up to 300 feet on the Cat5e Cat6 cable to the camera to provide the data stream and the power for that particular device.
Yeah, I think that does. I think that covers everything. That's PTZs.
Yep.
Awesome. Super excited about it. All the resources that we have mentioned, any of the documents like the auto tracking guide, some general PTZ guides, those will be in the description below. Of course, all of our contact information will be as well. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to our team, Michael's team. Anyone here at SCW would be more than happy to answer any questions you have. And we're very excited to have discussions regarding PTZs with you. Thanks so much for joining us today. We'll see you.
Yeah.